You'll probably notice that Damani and I are going to go on screen and off screen. This is our adaptation of social distancing. We want it to be in the same space so that we can kind of present some information, but at the same time have a conversation. There are some things that are just not, they're just not as easy when you're behind two different computer screens. So we ask for your patience as we kind of adjust between the transitions. All right, so with that being said, we're going to get right into our session for today. We're going to start by looking at the objectives and what everyone will hopefully walk away from this time having experienced. For today, we have two objectives. You'll notice that I have them in a table. I spent about 12 years as a classroom educator, and towards the end of my career, it became really important for me to not only tell the students what we were going to accomplish, but also to let them know why. And so when we think about instructional planning in a trauma-sensitive manner, we always want to do things with students, not to students. And so this kind of affirms I'm not just pulling a goal out of the air. I am pulling something that is going to be collectively beneficial for the entire learning community. And so providing students with a purpose kind of sets us up in a contract, and it lets them know what they are going to walk away with. This is really, really important, especially for marginalized communities. And we'll talk about some of that vocabulary in a little bit. But for Black and Brown students, it's really important for them to know that they've walked away with new content, new knowledge, new skills, and exactly what that is. So our objective. So by the end of the session, participants will leave with key terms that define and explain how racism presents a unique type of trauma and harm for Black and Brown students, staff, and members of the community. Why are we doing this? We want to develop a common conceptual understanding so that everyone is speaking the same language. So like when we say things like marginalized, like we all have a very, we all have the same idea as to what that means. When we're talking about race, we have a very clear and common understanding of that term. There'll be a number of terms that we'll kind of just break down as we go throughout this hour. And then the second objective is to have ideas and action steps to dismantle the pattern of racial trauma in our schools and learning spaces. And this, quite simply, is so that we are consciously working to stop harming Black and Brown students. School is a place of harm if we aren't conscious about what we are doing and why we are doing it. All right, so how are we going to accomplish these things? We're going to, like I said, discuss some critical terms and concepts. We have a really short, quick text that we're going to read by Chris Edmondon. For everyone from Schenectady on this call, he was our first urban schools keynote speaker. And he wrote an article last month about some of the things that we're going to talk about. We're going to spend some time discussing and reflecting, and then to accomplish our last objective, we're going to do some initial action planning. So with that being said, I just want to quickly have everyone look at some group agreements. We're not going to go through them all because we are going to spend a lot of time just kind of presenting some terms and information. But in the time that we are discussing, I'm going to ask that everyone really think about two key agreements. The first one is lean into discomfort. If there's something that you hear or something that someone is saying and it kind of hits you someplace, like lean into that, right? And then the second one is respond to your body. Where in your body are you feeling it? We did this earlier, and so I'll kind of mention this, like when I was talking about a particular incident, like I started realizing that I was feeling it, and that's the nature of this work. It's about how we are processing things and then how we connect to other people as we process them. So if we're not aware of what's happening in our body, we can't communicate that with other people. That's something that we want to model, and we want to have language around so that we can help students also go through that process of acknowledging something might be uncomfortable, something might not feel good, but it's something that we want for them to process. All right, so we'll jump into our first concept. And the first one is just about race, right? So race is really, really complex. We can spend hours talking about it, but for our purposes in Schenectady, when we're talking about Black and Brown students, we are talking about students who could be Guyanese, Dominican, Puerto Rican. We want to understand that race is complex. It is a social political construct It was devised to categorize and separate people. And so while it might not be real, it has real implications. Students who may not see themselves as students of color are still engaged by society in ways that marginalize and inferiority. And that's simply because of the process of socialization. So they might say, I'm not Black, I'm not that, but society will still treat them in ways that are marginalizing. So sometimes it's easier to think of nationalities where people come from. So nationalities that fall under the umbrella of Blackness include, but are definitely not limited to, people from countries in Africa, African Americans, Jamaicans, Haitians, people from the Caribbean. There are so many more. All right, so we're talking about race and we're talking about racial trauma. So what we have seen, especially over the last 6 months, is the devastating effects of ignoring racism, right? So racism is not just a feeling, it's not just something that's bad, but it has physiological implications, right? So when you are denied access, opportunities, and resources, when you are not believed, when you go to the doctors and you say that you're in pain or you have this issue, it leads to heightened levels of stress. It leads to a phenomenon known as weathering. Weathering was initially studied in 1992 with women only, and they found that it definitely had physical effects on their health and also reduced lifespan simply because of the chronic stress. So if you look at kind of like this collage on this page, and if you look at some of the dates, these are all fairly recent dates. You know, August 5th, the governor of Nevada is saying institutional racism is a problem, and we recognize it as a problem, and we're going to create policies to address those problems. And then in some of these headlines, it is explicitly saying racism kills. It's not, you know, that physical one-time effect, but it is the day in and day out impact of being subjected to treatment that is unfair, inhumane, and unjust. All right, so I am going to go to my corner, and Damani is going to come on, and he's going to talk a little bit about impact versus intent.
Hello, everybody. How you doing today? Thanks for coming to hang out with Alicia and myself. And if you haven't noticed, Alicia's mask is way cooler than mine. She didn't get me a cool Ninja Sub-Zero rated mask or whatever. So we're going to get right into talking about impact versus intent. And so this is really the overarching thing about what we're going to talk about today. I like to start off by saying that we all work extremely hard. And you know, the variety of roles that we serve in across this district and other districts, you know, we really show up for our students and families. And that is us and most of the people that we work with. There's exceptions to every rule. However, you know, I think for the most part, we all are committed to helping and serving our students and families and providing them with a quality education. So when you wake up every day and you walk into a building, knowing that that is what your intent is, genuinely wanting to help our students and the families of our students, and really create this safe and effective learning environment for all. Sometimes it's hard for us to not understand that how we can have that intention yet have a negative impact on some of our students, and particularly our Black and Brown students. It's what I call the gut punch feeling, right? And we'll get into a little bit later about some examples about where that can happen. But it's important that we understand that our students usually will react to the impact of something, not our intent of something, right? I'll use the example because it's kind of the low-hanging fruit here, is around like when we teach students to code switch. And so I remember being in a building and overhearing a student giving a teacher a compliment. And I believe the term the student was like, yo, that's really dope. And this is a teacher that I know, and a teacher that cares about students, that will go above and beyond for students. But the teacher in that moment, it was a teachable moment, talked to the student and said, you know, that's the type, and I'm paraphrasing this part, but that's the type of language that will prevent you from, getting a job or going further in life. It was something to that energy around like you have to, really be careful about how you talk. So I think in especially in urban schools, it's important, and not to just say urban schools, when we're teaching Black and Brown students, we have to be very honest about the world that and how that they might experience. And we have to acknowledge the fact that their experiences might be different than our own and those of their white counterparts. So that example, the teacher was really trying to kind of make sure that the student understood there's going to be spaces where that language, that type of language, that vernacular people will make some assumptions about you, and it might limit your access. And the intention in that moment was to help that student, to make sure that we're preparing our students to go out into the world and to compete, quite frankly. Even though the intention was good, the impact was really saying, the way you talk, and as the student's given a compliment, no less, the way you talk amongst your family and your community isn't valid. Now, if I was my better self in that moment, I would have kind of interfered, or at least, try to pull up my colleague and say, hey, that this, how that student might have taken that. I would have made sure that I was, created some space for the student to say, look, and this is kind of the second part that is important that we talk about, is help the student and my colleague realize that though that might be a reality, right? So our students, Black and Brown students who go off into the world, and their language will be policed, and sometimes slang, if you will, will limit their options. It's really, really important that when you're preparing that student, you make sure that that student is aware of the fact that it's not your language that's the problem. It's not your vernacular that's the problem. There might be very real consequences to you showing up in a space as your authentic self, but that is a product of systemic racism. So you can prepare our students for the world that is, at the same time explaining to them and making sure that you're validating them and validating their experience, their culture, and their identity. And at the same time, let them know you might experience these things due to that, but the key thing is that's wrong and that shouldn't happen to you. So I think that, even when we are most of the time, our intentions are to help our students, we have to be really, really mindful of the way that our words and our actions impact our students, because again, our students will more than likely react and respond to our impact, right? Not our intention. And when our intentions are pure, we can kind of get upset when a student responds to our impact and our intentions, because we're like, hey, I'm here to help you. I'm trying to tell you the truth. I'm trying to make sure that I'm preparing you for the world. So it's just, kind of a basic example around how impact and attention might not always align with helping the students that we want. And I think I'm gonna slide it on over to Alicia as our COVID chair switch here that we're gonna do. All right, great, I'm gonna roll out.
All right. Phil, do we have any questions? Are we good? Good, okay. All right. So we're going to spend a couple of minutes reading this really, really short article. And I'm going to ask if there's anybody, I'm an avid journaler, if there's anybody who wants to have a writing space or open a second screen, I invite you to do that now. This is going to be kind of our first reflective discussion. So I'm going to ask, as you are reading this article, which Phil is going to drop into the chat, think about 3 questions. 1, what was Edmund's intent? 2, what was the impact of Edmund's actions? And then 3, how might students engage with him and other students based on his response to the events of 9/11? So like I said, he wrote this article last month, but he's reflecting on a time where his intent and impact just did not match, and it was on the morning of 9/11. Another way that you might want to think about that third part is how might the classroom dynamic be affected because of Edmund's response on 9/11. So I'm going to set a timer for 5 minutes, and this is a great practice. I know, in Schenectady, part of our learning is supposed to be synchronous, to just kind of put little breaks in there where people can students can have the space to, read, decompress, and process on their own, and then we'll come back together and we'll discuss the 3 questions. All right, so if everyone is all set and we have no questions, I'm going to start the timer now. All right, so I'm going to ask that people use the chat. And so as people use the chat, I'm just going to parrot what is written in the chat. If you aren't familiar with WebEx, you'll want to make sure that what you put in the chat, the everyone option is selected. And in that way, if it jumps or if something gets missed, people will still be able to see it. So why don't we start with the first question? So looking at the article, what was Edmund's intent? And he has a few different intents in a few different places. So he kind of starts like how he started just kind of teaching, and then he talks about the morning of 9/11. So if we could just pull through his intent and put that in the chat. All right, so, so Erica said his intent in ignoring the chaos was to protect students by creating a sense of normalcy. And Erica just went ahead and was an overachiever and said, but the impact is to create possible distress for students, affecting a student's sense of safety and not allowing them time and space to absorb and heal and learn. So I see there's a theme of normalcy. So Tanya said creating normalcy in class. Melissa said he was providing consistency, right? And that is important. Karan says initially to teach despite chaos, then trying to share the true intent of what teaching is. Lindy said to just keep teaching. His intent was to just keep teaching. And we see kind of a theme of to ignore chaos and continue teaching. All right. So in that morning, it was, I see like protect, provide chaos, provide consistency, try to shield students from the chaos, but what's the impact, right? And so Amy threw in there again, normalcy. So when we think about the impact, so Roger said his intent was to do what he was told. Sometimes we have to process that. Is what we are being told to do, is the policy actually helpful, or is a policy harmful? So some impacts: insecurity in students. Impact was not helping students deal with the trauma. Impact: students felt vulnerable and unsafe, lost of trust. The theme: students feel unseen. Feelings were not addressed. So that is probably one of the easiest ways to create a toxic or hostile environment. Just ignore all those feelings. Just push them down. Act like they're not there, right? That's a part of our humanity. So when we don't address what students are bringing in, then there really is no teaching going on. The impact was not being a support for all students, not creating a safe space for everyone. Thank you, Jen. All right, so we clearly see like his intent might have come from a pure place, like, right? Like I'm trying to shield them, I'm trying to protect them, but the impact then are all of these effects which probably could last beyond that moment. So when we think about question number 3, how might students engage with him based on his response, or how might the classroom dynamic be affected? You don't have to answer both, but whichever question speaks to you. What are the long-term implications of what Edmund did that morning? So racism towards peers. That definitely could be dropped into the classroom dynamic. His intent was to keep teaching. At the moment of impact, there was confusion. The students could tell something was very wrong. He should have been honest with students in a reassuring way. Absolutely, right? because we all deal with uncertainty. So if in our class we act as if we're impervious to everything that's going on, then we're really setting students up for failure. Like, it is a human response to wonder, to question, to have curiosity about the moment. And if we don't teach them how to do that, then we're really not providing them with essential skills. Resentment. I see resentment as a theme, feeling like they can't express themselves, right? It's almost like you are creating like a closed neck system. Some students may feel it is okay to express their racist or hateful beliefs, and he feels he agrees since he did not speak up, right? So that's along the lines of silence is violence. Sometimes our silence gives students license to do things that are harmful, and then it then shapes an environment which is harmful. And if students feel like they have to be vigilant, or they feel like they have to look over their shoulders, or they feel like they always have to protect and defend themselves, there's no learning happening. They're spending their emotional and their mental energy trying to protect themselves. Feeling like inauthenticity. Thank you, Dr. Archie. Yeah. So it's like, I'm going to put this mask on. Interesting analogy for the moment, but I'm going to put this emotional mask on, and it really doesn't reflect how I'm feeling. And so if I have a mask on, I'm operating in this one way behind the mask, and then I'm operating in another, a true, genuine way. And again, that's not where we want students to spend their emotional and mental energy. Lack of trust in educators. Who are you going to monitor and decide? Right. So, so Michelle, that kind of speaks to gatekeeping, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. Like, he withheld vital information from them because remember, he's in middle school, so these students, like, they know, like, I might have family, I might have friends who work there, who are in that area, right? And so, what do I now think about this person who isn't giving me this information and isn't helping me process, right? This moment. So, so I said earlier, you know, when we were thinking about the norms, 9/11 is a moment, and, you know, we're from New York. You know, if you lived here, you probably are going back to that space and time. Our students are in another moment of national crisis. This is something that is going to be seared into their memory and into their being. So everything that we say is either going to be a step that is going to help them heal from what is going on in this moment, or it's going to be something that is going to further harm and marginalize them. Right, exactly. Yes, yes. All right. So, so thank you all for those like beautifully clear and honest reflections on that. And we're going to do a little bit more reflecting. We're going to reflect around the concept of whiteness. If there's anybody who was in our anti-racist BLT training, you've seen some of this. But remember, one of our goals is to develop common language and understandings. So we want to kind of apply these terms and concepts in different spaces. So with that being said, I'm going to roll on over and invite Damani back.
Okay, thank you, Alicia. So what is whiteness? So it's important that when we talk about whiteness, we understand whiteness as a institutional, whiteness on an institutional level, right? Yeah, as well as the interpersonal level, but it's really important that we look at it that it's not simply the idea that whites are superior to people of color, but a deeper premise that supports this idea, the definition of whites as the norm or the standard for human, and people of color as a deviation. So if white is the norm, so any non-white culture is a deviation, right? So what we saw, what he was trying to do was he was trying to create a sense of normalcy in the classroom for the students, right? He was like, okay, I'm not going to address this because I have a job to do, and I'm a teacher, and it's my job to teach the students. I'm going to maybe double down on my academics and make sure that even through this craziness that's going on, I still deliver. They still get what they need, right? So again, that norm of control, that norm of just academics and not stopping and not honoring and valuing the very real experience that our students are going through in the moment is a product of whiteness. And this is a good part to talk about and recognize the fact that this was a teacher of color, right? This is a teacher of color. We are all capable and likely to perpetuate whiteness as the norm. We can internalize whiteness as people of color, and we project it upon our students. From my earlier example with the teacher, hey, listen, that type of, talk, might not help you get a job. There's some truth in that statement, right? Like, let's be honest. There could be some real truth in that statement, but without the context of, hey, but that is a product of whiteness, systemic racism, and it's wrong, then what you're saying is you're complicit in projecting the norm of whiteness. And without him addressing the fact that his Muslim students, were under some real pressure in that moment, and not being clear about what his expectation was in and outside of that classroom, he projected, that he was okay with the norm of whiteness and being complicit. So, Phil, if you want to go ahead and drop that link here in the chat. So there's a quick video that we're going to watch. Parody. It's kind of a silly video, but it's an interesting watch. We're going to build off it. We tried to play it earlier. The sound didn't really come through. So now we're going to drop it here in the chat. So we'll give you guys a couple minutes to watch it. I'm going to play it here. You won't get any sounds, just as a way to kind of be on the same page with you here. So yeah, it's like 2 minutes. So only a couple minutes here. Yeah, so yeah, 105 definitely. About 105, 106, we'll get rolling to the conversation. Okay, so you can just go ahead and throw in the chat. You can just go ahead and throw it in the chat, and anything that stood out to you watching that video, that short video clip. She loved that. Yes, wow is a very appropriate response to the video. Absolutely. I see all these claims on Facebook. Feel free to share that on your Facebook page as well. It's all too relatable. The guy in the office had a need to claim racism toward the Irish. Yes. Yeah. How many times have we heard statements like that and don't know how to respond? Good stuff. The first comment about having a channel geared towards white people, aren't they all? Yep, that's whiteness. That's whiteness as a norm. Right. Okay. So Dr. Pepper may be hard to get, but diet racism is readily available. Indeed, it always is. And I think so, obviously, there's some dramatization here, right? There's, but I think that we really need to be mindful about what are some of the diet racist things that we can do, that we might do or perpetuate when in the presence of our Black and brown students and their families, and also amongst our peers, right? I think in the moment, in the kind of the example I used earlier, had I been my best self, I would have said, you know what? Let me tell you why that could have been problematic. And I would have been able to say, because I know what your intention is, because I know who you are, but that could have been problematic. So I think that it's safe to say, hopefully, a lot of us, if we ever seen anything as blatant as what some things that we saw in the that video there, we would address. But I think we have to really pay attention to that slow dose of diet racism, that injustice that we perpetuate with our students and families on a daily basis. So that's something that we really just want to pay attention to. So we're talking about what could whiteness look like when we're trying to help, right? Because we're talking about being a harmful helper. So there's a couple bullet points here on our slide, but I'm gonna just kind of go over one that I'll invite Alicia back in to kind of talk about some of the others. Okay, so the one I want to talk about is objectivity, right? So when sometimes when our students, our colleagues can say things that are harmful to our Black and Brown students and our Black and Brown community members, we kind of feel the need to be objective and it's like, oh, I might not agree, but they have a right to say that, or there's, I don't totally agree, but there's some good in either side. I've heard that before. There's some good on both sides when we're talking about people's perspective. And we have to be clear that when it comes to things that are racist or harmful, there is not good on both sides. There is not. There is good, and then there is racism, right? And it's a pretty clear line, and we want to, make sure that our students understand our expectation, and our students understand that we as the adults, the leaders in the building and in the room, know that there's times that we can do some things that could be harmful and problematic, even when we're trying to help. And objectivity is one that I see a lot, not really wanting to address things in a way that we don't want to silence our students, even when they're being harmful. So now I have Alicia come back in and okay, I'll go right into it. Okay, so I'm gonna tell a story now about what one of my experience was, or when I was in 5th grade, and what does it look like when we may think we're helping, but we're really harming. So when I was in 5th grade, we had a long-term sub. Our teacher was out for a period of time, and we had a long-term sub, and you know how kids behave when subs come in the room, right? And I was that guy. Like, I was absolutely goofing off, and I got into some trouble. And I want to be clear that I absolutely earned the trouble that I was in through my behaviors and actions. As we were walking out to the bus, the long-term sub was there, and I was talking with my friend, and I was telling him, like, oh man, I'm in trouble when I get home when my parents find out that I was acting up in school today. The sub pulled me aside with a look of genuine concern in her eyes. This is a white woman with genuine concern in her eye. And she was saying, listen, I'm not going to tell your parents because I don't want you to get a whooping. I was kind of like, She's like, I don't want them to beat you. So I'm not going to tell them how you acted today in class. I just want you to, behave yourself, moving forward. But I'm not going to tell them because I don't want them to whoop you. And my 5th grade self, I took full advantage of that. And I was like, oh, well, thank you. I don't want to get whoopings either. So, even though, there was no chance of, my parents whooping me or beating me or abusing me behind me being a knucklehead in school. So her intention, as tone deaf and inherently racist as it was, her intention, I believe, was good. She thought that, hey, you're a Black kid. I know that your parents whoop all you guys' butts, and I'm not going to, participate in that for you, young man. So I'm not going to tell your mom so she doesn't whoop you, but you just fix your behavior. I gladly accepted the fact that she wasn't going to tell my mother or my father about my behavior, but it really sent a clear message to me. I felt like I got away with something because I did, but then I had to trade something off. And at that time, that age, I couldn't really articulate it. I really couldn't, put it to words or even really have the concept, but I just knew it felt a little yucky, right? Like, I knew like I was trading something. And what I was trading was really, the integrity of my family, right? Like, it was like, she's basically openly saying that there's something about me that gives her the impression that my parents can't be trusted. And, my parents are going to be abusive. And, she reiterated that with, so I want you to just change your behavior, but I'm not going to tell them. Like, it was okay for her, someone I just met, to have a secret with me that's going to protect me from my very loving, caring, and supportive parents, who definitely would have held me accountable, but I, wouldn't have beaten me in the way that she was responding. Interesting enough, related as well as later on, like I said, this was a long-term sub, the narrative changed. There was, at some point it was kind of turned into like, hey, you better straighten up or I'll call home. She still hadn't realized that I was in no physical danger, but at some point she was willing to exercise that control over me and kind of like hang that, possible whooping over my head to keep me in line in class. So it just said a lot. But again, people who sometimes are trying to help, and I think initially I believe that she was trying to help. She was trying to kind of build a relationship with me to say, hey, I want to look out for you, but at the expense of my family and my parents and our relationship. And as I reflect, I think, well, I wouldn't be worried about me. I'd be worried about you if my mother knew, the implications of what you're saying or what you're, suggesting, how they raise and parent me and my sister. So that was definitely a situation where even though she might have been trying to help, she was extremely harmful. So, and it built a lack of trust between us, which ended up being, it was an appropriate response for me not to trust her because I was reacting to her, the impact of what she did, not what her intention might have been. So, and now I will put my mask on and slide up for Alicia.
All right, so the next concept that we're gonna play with a little bit is the idea of dismantle. What do we mean when we say dismantle? When we say dismantle, we're speaking out against all of the systems of oppression, racism, sexism, classism, all the isms, and calling for an end to the beliefs, practices, customs, norms, policies, regulations, laws, and institutions that oppress historically marginalized and vulnerable communities. So like in that last story, like that belief that, all Black and brown parents are going to beat or abuse their kids, like that's an idea that we need to definitely dismantle, right? When we think about the experience with Chris Edmond, and so administration came in and said that I have to do this. We have to think about like what are the effects of not sharing this information with our students. That system where it's like I'm just going to take this information from this person and pass it along, even though I know that it could cause harm. Not having that level of critical thinking or analysis. We want to dismantle that, but then we also want to dismantle the policies and regulations, right? That harm our Black and brown students. In our space, we're really looking at our classrooms. We're really looking at our school buildings. And again, for those of you who are on the anti-racist BLT, it's really about creating those systems that are going to provide the most space for Black and brown students to simply exist in their full humanity. So what I am going to do is I'm going to go to the next, this is our last reflective conversation. We have about 14 minutes. So I want everyone to kind of just take a moment and look at these questions. I would like for people to take a minute and think about, one, identify a time in the recent past. It's easy to go back to like the beginning of our career or like, something from childhood because we were less experienced then. But, we have lived an entire lifetime within the last 6 months. Think about something that you have either seen, witnessed, or may yourself have been harmed by a harmful helper, right? So identify that time and hold that in your consciousness. Knowing what you know now, what will you do differently when you meet your students in a few weeks? And then who will you tap as an accountability partner? Because the way that we have engaged with students, the way that we have engaged with our careers as educators is all based in whiteness. It's all based in, maintaining power. And it's even more deeply entrenched because we work in a city school district, right? So we want to think, who's going to help to remind me this is what I am pledging to do. This is what I'm committing to do moving forward, realizing the disparities, realizing that racism is not just a bad feeling, but it is something that causes harm on multiple levels and real trauma. So I feel like knowing that it causes trauma and then hearing some of the stories of trauma, I definitely shout out Dr. Rios this morning. He was talking about just several layers of trauma, but there's also just the day-to-day, flight. I know we've labeled them microaggressions, and I've been thinking about that term lately, but yeah, like things happen on a daily basis. So we need to kind of keep ourselves reminded of our goal and our purpose to operate as people who are going to reduce harm and not perpetuate harm. Yep, so I would like everyone to read the questions. Did you want to add anything?
No.
Yeah. All right, so I'm going to give everyone a moment to reflect, and then we will go through the chat. And I do want people to put information in the chat. I will parrot it again because I'm also hoping that maybe you'll be inspired by an idea that someone has for what they plan on doing moving forward. All right, so we have some people who are putting some things into the chat. Thank you for that, Erica. Yes, this is hard. It is in every, it's something you recommit and repurpose yourself to every day. So as you wrap up with your reflections, just put them into the chat. All right, so we have, I truly love my students, but I'm now acutely aware of my white programming and thoughts regarding Black and brown people. I do not beat myself up, but I am making things conscious. Yes. Yeah, so that's definitely do not beat yourself up, right? So that goes back to perfectionism, trying to do everything right. We didn't have all the information. I love to quote Auntie Maya. She said, "When we know better, we do better," and that's all we can ask of ourselves. All right. So I will say this, people are kind of answering all of them. And so that makes it a little harder to read back because it jumps a little bit, but I'm going to try my best. All right. So I didn't feel comfortable. Okay. Okay. All right. So I'm going to come back to that. So Roger said, "You make me think of a student who told me years ago, I used to think you were one of those rich white teachers who came here to save us. But now I know that's not true. I think she meant that I was more human, authentic than I thought, but I would love to reconnect with her and ask her more about that." Yeah, definitely. Like students are so honest and they tell us about ourselves in ways that we probably don't even want to know. but they also kind of put a mirror up to blind spots that we might have. Seeing students punished, scolded for using language not seen by white people as appropriate is difficult to raise this problem with this teacher, white adults but necessary. So that's a common thing. We saw that in our session this morning. I think Damani had a story about that. I've seen that before. So maybe that's something, you know, that we want to kind of plan around, like, hey, you know, I know you said this, and I think, Damani, you framed it really well. Like, I know your intent was this, but the student may have perceived this, right? And so maybe that's, you know, a place where we kind of process with one of our colleagues so that they realize correcting a student is not necessarily in their best interest.
Damani, can you move closer to the mic?
Okay, I thought I was yelling. Okay.
All right. I have too many friends on Facebook that repost memes with various levels of racism. Yeah, there's social media is like the wild, wild west. Sometimes it's a great place to have a conversation, but sometimes you really do have to assess if it is worth the energy. But it could also be a great place to practice and, you know, have tough conversations with people you might have a different relationship with than with coworkers. I think having discussions with your students about the events of this summer, try not to shy away from the most difficult conversations, but have meaningful discussions about them. Right, and so we don't know, like the events of this summer might carry on into the fall, right? Might, historically, we don't normally see those types of things in the winter, but I'm lying. I've participated in freezing cold protests before. It's possible.
What we can say definitely is that racism will continue, right, in the winter, right? Like, you know, it definitely won't say, oh, it's a little too cold for racism today. It's going to be out there, and diet racism is readily available, as someone said earlier in the comments. So I think that's important that we understand that our students are living with this and kind of negotiating and trying to learn how to navigate that on a daily basis. So we have to recommit ourselves every day, like Alicia said earlier. We talk about some of these things on Facebook and social media, and we are, you know, adults, and you know, our circle of friends usually are adults. So imagine what our students are being exposed to around racism and the harm that is caused to them and the things that they're seeing on their social media platforms. Earlier, Alicia was talking about microaggressions, and she chuckled because this is a term that I hate the language of micro. It is a microaggression, but it has macro impact, right? It has huge impact on our students and our colleagues of color. So, you know, we just have to make sure that we unpack those things, the power in language. So I think let's start a petition to change that term. Are you with me, Alicia?
Yeah.
Right there.
That's by 1,000 cuts, right?
Yeah.
But I wanted to also say if we do not have those conversations, right, then we're doing the same thing that Edmund did. And then we are, you know, infusing our system, our classroom space with that level of what aren't you telling me? You know, what aren't you helping me process through? Right. Right. Why is it my suffering, my experience, something that we're dealing with. I think I have, okay, so I think having discussions, oh, no, we did that. Got you, Phil, can't hear. Is it possible that bringing in too much reality can make us harmful helpers in a way? If it's not done with intentionality, and also if it's not done with proper planning. Yes, Roger, that is a very good question. It's not that we're bringing too much reality. Reality is at our doorstep. It's there. It's how we then present it to students and how we process it if students bring it to us.
That a good thing to do is you can look back in our group agreements, right? And you can kind of use that as a frame to say, like, listen, students, there's things going on in the world that are impacting us all. So let's talk about them. And you can even show some vulnerability to say, but you know what? This is my concern. I want to talk about it, but I don't want to inflict further harm. And hey, I'm not all the way sure about, how to do this. So if you help me, together we can, we can work together to really unpack this as a classroom community. So don't ever be afraid to be, vulnerable with your students. In fact, what that does, that reinforces to them it's okay not to know, but it's not okay not to do anything. All right. So yeah. All right. So you wanna.
And I would also say with that, the more that you do it, the better that you will become at it. So even like with this, like Damani and I were talking, we're like, oh, we really like this session, we really like this time. And like I said, I didn't anticipate having feelings around 9/11. And I'm like, maybe I should have even put a trigger warning in there, right? So the more that you are in these spaces, the more you're like, oh, I have to think about that, right? Because again, our intent is always to help. But as we become more conscious, then we're like, oh, I have to think about that and how I present that. All right. So last couple ones we'll wrap up. Starting a parent meeting with the outcome I thought was best in mind, but really hearing the parents first. But by listening to the parent, really understanding what a difference the best outcome for the student. Lately, Esther, tell me what you were thinking. Yes. 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 Ensuring that as a class person, I take time to discussion regarding the past 6 months. But yes. Typing Pat, okay. Calling attention to her protest activity. I'm not sure if that makes sense. It depends on your class and on your students. I don't know who said that. To the person who was out protesting, if your students were out, some students want to know, like, hey, were you out? Did you care? Did you do anything? And if those are your students, then yeah, definitely share that point of commonality. But if not, you kind of just you read your room. So I know we are wrapping up, and I do want to, and I'm glad so everyone can look through the chat, but I do want to honor everyone's time. I want to leave with a few words. I hope that everyone was able to take something from the action planning. Who will you tap as your accountability partner? You don't have to share. I will say there are some people that are on this call that some people named earlier as accountability partners, so look out for them. But think of your accountability partner and who you're going to go through this work with. It doesn't have to be one person, it can be a team. Hopefully it is. But I want to leave with this idea that I heard Dr. Rios say this morning. And that is, he asked, how do we begin to project a future that we have not yet begun to imagine? Our future has been mired in racism. It has been mired in whiteness. So the things that we are trying to do are things that are beyond our imagination, but we can do it. It will require intense and intentional effort and energy, but our kids are worth it. And so I am really, really glad that everyone decided to spend the hour here. And we hope that everyone has walked away with the idea we're all human, we're all going to make mistakes. But the more conscious and the more reflective we are, the better we will be at reducing harm and creating spaces of healing for our students.
Greatly appreciate it. Again, I hope it was meaningful for you. It's been meaningful for me. And if we are more conscious, it's going to be extremely meaningful for our students and our families. Be kind to yourself. Give yourself grace like you did with us in this virtual world. Continue to move forward. Thank you guys. I appreciate it. You spending our time with us today.